Hello everybody. Hope you can hear me well today. Okay, cool. Perfect. Thank you for waiting and welcome at this third lesson. Today we're going to pick up from last time where we've seen some of the interface of Blender. Today we're going to see how to do some small editing on objects and shapes. So starting to move around with creating real design really in Blender. Splash screen. I hope you had some time to explore the interface, and we will go with general. As I said, we have also 2D animation environment, but I want you to get familiar with the general interface first, and then you can pick up the environment you prefer. But let's really know first the general interface. We'll start with the usual cube, and as I said, in the scene you may find different kind of objects, so we select what we don't need for today, which is the light, and then I press delete and I remove it, and this object, which is the camera, and delete it. You can select with left click or with the square, it's the same thing. You can also select from the outliner and it will do exactly the same thing. So let's delete also the default cube, which is a classic. When you use Blender, you normally delete the default cube. And let's click on the Z axis up here. So we are facing down basically. See, this is our grid. I'm rotating with the middle mouse button. And if we want to go straight down in a orthographic view, we click on the Z up here. Okay, so we want to have the red axis, which is the X horizontal, and the green axis, which is the Y vertical, while the ones we don't see, it's the blue one, which is the Z, which would go from here to down here. So it's disabled right now. We don't need it. We don't need it, especially when we do 2D. So one of the most common shape that you will find yourself drawing, it's found in the mesh menu. So add in the scene. You want to make sure that you are in object mode, add, mesh, and then we'll start with plane, which is a square. Whenever you add an object to Blender, you have an additional submenu here below. And if we click to expand, it's a temporary submenu. So if I click outside, it's gone forever. So it's only when you create the object. It could be expanded or not, depending on how you left the previous time you created an object. We have the size, it's 2 meters. You can clearly see that it fits 2 big square by 2 big square, so that's 2 meters. It's aligned to the world, that's fine. We don't need to care about this. It means it's basically centered. It could be aligned to the 3D cursor. That, to remember this round, this circle here with the cross, we disabled last time and we disabled this time too. We only have the origin of the object. So again, add mesh plane. Then we have the location, which is exactly what you imagine. It's the position of this. If I move it on that side, it's like what you imagine exactly. It can be 1 meter, it could be 2 meters, and then it's completely off compared to his previous position. We also have the Z position. We don't care in 2D about the Z position. and we have rotation. Now for the rotation, it's actually the opposite. We only take care in 2D of the Z rotation, because it will rotate around the axis that we don't see. Okay, so it's this kind of rotation. While if we start rotating like this, it seems that it's scaling, in reality is rotating, and I'm going to show you what I mean. Let me open another window, but this window is gonna stay like this. This is just to show you what I mean. Okay, so the Z, it's doing this movement, while the other two, of course, won't be visible here as rotation. They look like it's only scaling, but in reality I'm rotating the object. So you need to be very careful when you're rotating an object to know where are you rotating, which axis I'm rotating. Now if you click once and you press G on the keyboard, which means enable move, as you can see here it says move selected items, shortcut shift spacebar and G. In our case it's going to be G, because shift spacebar enable another menu, which is basically the same menu, but on the same spot you press shift spacebar. Forget it, just remember G or press here. If you press here, you have your usual axis, a tool to move around, so you can click on one only, or click anywhere and move it in the space. Or if you are in this mode, which is the selection mode, you press G and just move. Okay, so you don't have to select any axis, and you don't see any axis. Now if you want to move in one axis only, for example, let's say that I want to move this horizontally and I want just to use the shortcut, you press the command, which is G first, and then the axis you want to move. So in this case I want to move it horizontally, so it's going to be X. I press X and then I move only on the X axis. Okay, it's going to be aligned. Again, one click to select the object, one click on G, that means I enable the tool and it's going to move everywhere. And then if I press X, it will basically snap on the X axis. In the same way, if I press G and then I press Y, it's going to move only on the vertical. Now if I press G and I'm still in this screen, I press G and I press then Z, you see on the right side of the screen that a blue axis has been enabled, and it's showing me that's the axis you're moving on. And in 3D I can see where I'm moving, but in the orthographic view on the left nothing is happening. So be extra careful what you're doing with the shortcuts. If in doubt, if you do this, for example, let's say that you don't have this view enabled because normally you don't use it, you just use it this, and you press G, then you press Z and you say, okay, what's happened, why didn't nothing happen? You can still rotate and realize that your object has moved down. So well, you can undo it, or don't forget you always have this, you can check here and say, oh actually it's -6 meters from where it's supposed to be. So just select and hit 0. In the same way you can do from here without any problem, so you're just moving the object in those two axes, or you can just do this. So if you know exactly how much you want to move, it's much faster doing with sliding in this, or just type in where do you want to move the object. Okay, so this is the how to move an object in and knowing where are you doing the operation. Are you doing the operation on a 2D plane, or are you doing the operation on a 3D plane? Are you still there, guys? Is it still working? Is all okay? Is all clear for you? Perfect. Okay, so we'll see the move tool. We have the rotation tool. It's exactly the same. If I click on here, I will have my axis in views, and here again I have the problem. I want only to rotate the Z, which is the blue one, so I have to go carefully on the Z. If I click on the other two axes, I have the same problem that I had before. It's rotating in weird ways. I don't want it. But if you click directly on R on the keyboard, you will always rotate around the axis that is facing the camera, that is directed towards the camera. So in this case, the Z axis is toward us, towards the viewer, so it will rotate exactly as you want it to rotate. Same thing as before, you have here on the right. Oh, hello 3D Illusions. Welcome, how are you? This for you is going to be very basic. We are just doing a lesson on the very first step on Blender. 3D Illusions, it's a YouTuber and is actually a very skilled 3D modeler, a 3D designer. Hello Stories Markets. So the scale tool, it's similar concept. I can enable the scale tool just selecting the object and pressing S on the keyboard, and will scale it uniformly, or I can use one of the axes, or I can even do the same thing that we did for the move. So let's say that we are in selection mode. We select with one click or with a rectangle, then we press S, and then we decide, oh, actually I want to scale it horizontally. Then I press X and I just scale it horizontally. Okay, and if I change my mind, I can press Y and I can scale it vertically. In case of the scale, specifically on the scale, you may have a different problem, and I'll show you what I mean. Let's go here with a 3D view instead. If I scale an object and I decide to scale it in the Z axis, for example, nothing happened, but the scale changes. The reason why nothing happened in this case, it's because we have a plane. A plane has no depth. Okay, so we are going to introduce now some other concept. This rectangle, it's actually made of different components. When we've seen the 2D vectors, remember we had an outline that was called a border, and we have a fill. In this case, we have more components, and we don't have a fill really. We have something that it's similar, but it's not exactly the same. So we have vertices. Okay, in this case, a very simple shape. We have these edges, which I enable clicking here. So now I'm selecting the edges. Okay, these 4 edges. And then we have faces. Okay, this one is selected. It's one face. This is one face formed of 4 sides. Okay, which is called quad. Okay, QUAD. It's important to understand that while in a bitmap image, the pixel, it's the unit. In 3D graphics, the smallest unit that you can see, it's certainly a vertex. You can see an edge on its own, but what gives depth, it's actually, or what gives you a surface, it's actually called polygon. Now, the smallest polygon that you can have, it's made by 3 points and 3 edges. So let me select the vertices and I remove one of these. Whoops, sorry. Okay. And now this is the smallest entity you can have in a 3D engine. Okay, it's a triangle. You can have a quad. So normally triangle is called tri or tri, not sure. Then you have a quad, which is actually made by two triangles, but the two triangles are not visible, so you only see one quad. And the problem with this is that when I move in 3D, for example, a vertex, let's say that I move this. If I move it in 2D, there's no problem. Okay, I'm just changing the shape of this rectangle, no problem at all. Here you can see it's all okay. But if I change the position of this vertex in 3D, so let's say that I move it along the Z, okay? I'm moving this down. Now you can clearly see that has been split into triangle. One is this one, and the other one is this one. This is not terribly important when you're doing 2D, because you're not gonna see the difference. But if you want to give some depth and you start extruding shapes or giving having objects one under another, you need to understand what's going on. So this is why I'm showing you this. Okay, going back, the reason why I show you this in the beginning is because when you have a cube instead of, when you have a cube instead of a rectangle, that it's exactly the same from the top, but the cube can be scaled actually in a different dimension. So right now I'm scaling this, which is changing completely the property of the object, but in 2D it's exactly the same. Okay, so you need to know that if you select, you're in 2D here and press S and then say, okay, let's scale the Z, nothing will happen, or you think nothing is happening, but actually a lot is happening. So you need to be extra careful what you are doing. If you want, you can always have enabled a 3D perspective viewport while you're working in 2D. This way you have an idea of what's happening constantly. Another thing you can do, it's actually working in 2D but with a perspective view. That means that, let's go back and let's go to our main view. Let's say that you're working in 2D but you want to tilt it a little bit, okay? This way you know that you are on a 3D environment, and if by mistake, say you have a cube, and it's by mistake you're moving this, you are scaling this, you see what's going on. But then again, with some practice you will get used to check exactly what's going on in your object. So let's go back to our plane and let's go back to the normal view. Oops. Okay. One thing you can do, or one thing I suggest to understand, is that as much as these are vectors, so as I show you with the bitmap against vectors, and I said the more you zoom and you never lose the resolution, is kind of the same for 3D, but your shape, it's actually rendered based on other parameters. So everything you see in 3D, it's actually a segment. It's very segmented. In order to get more resolution, you have to increase the number of vertices, the number of edges, and the number of polygons. So in our case, the number of faces. This means that you need to make sure you have the resolution you need on screen. So, classic example, let me remove this rectangle. Let me do something simple. Let's do a circle. Okay, this is a circle. It's just the perimeter of circumference, and there's no faces. Okay, there's no filling of any kind. It looks fine, but if you zoom in, you can see that I don't see the pixels, but I see the segments. Okay, so if I want a smoother circle, I have different options. One option is applying, when you are creating the circle, more vertices, like this. Okay, and now the segments are not visible. If I zoom a lot, I will eventually see them. The problem is that they are so tiny that now I barely see them. Okay, so if I visualize the vertices, you can see them now, but they are very close, and the curve is very gentle, so you don't see that it's segmented. Before I go on, I forgot to explain to you something else. We have a rectangle here, and then moving between the components of the rectangle, which are vertices, edges, and faces. The way I do it is getting into the edit mode. So if you look at here, it says object mode. You can click to edit mode, or you can just press tab as the fastest way, and you have here 3 new icons. One is to select the vertices, now one for the edges, and one for the faces. You can usually, what you do when you are a bit familiar with the interface, is pressing tab and then selecting 1, 2, or 3 on the keyboard. As you can see, 1 select the vertices, 2 the edges, and 3 the faces. So it's much faster than selecting icon or selecting menu here. Also, you may want in some case to enable the wireframe mode, which means you see only the outline and without faces. That doesn't mean that the face doesn't exist, it's just you are not seeing that. Okay, so this is the shading mode of the render viewport, sorry, of Blender viewport. If I open a new window, I can decide here to have it shaded, for example, and here having just the outline. So each single view can have its own settings of visualization. But if I click here and I enable tab, every selection in one window, it's of course working in the other one too. It's just a matter of selecting the best shading for the operation you need to do. Going back. So I'll show you this because when you are in edit mode and you click on a vertex, it's actually is going to show where the vertex is connected. You can see these lines that go from black to white where the vertex is selected. Same thing for the edges. I press 2, and if I select an edge, it's going to highlight the edge that is selected. And why I enable the wireframe, it's mainly because when you are in a solid mode, it's a bit harder to see what you selected, especially in 2D. In 3D it's different, but in 2D maybe a bit more complicated. Okay, now it's selected, but you cannot really see. So all the operations that we've seen, scaling, rotation, and move, we've seen for the whole object before. Let me enable a second. Okay, move. They are valid for any single components of the object or shape you create. So if I press edit mode with tab, and I go into vertex, I can select one vertex, I can select with shift 2 vertices, I can select all of them, or select, like, let's say 2, for example, these 2, and then if I press G on the keyboard or the tool move, I can move those. Okay, and same rules are applicable for the axis. I can press X and it will move horizontally, Y will move vertically. So it's slightly different from what you do with illustration software like Illustrator or from Graphic Designer that I've shown. But the main design in this course is going to happen in a Graphic Designer, so the design of the shapes, because it's faster and it's because it's a tool meant to be doing that faster. But once you import or you have a project directly in Blender, you need to be able to do all this editing inside Blender directly. Same thing for rotation. If I select two vertices and I press R, I'm going to rotate them, okay? And the problem, if I select a vertex and I rotate, you don't see anything because a vertex has no vector really, so has no orientation. At the moment, let's keep it like this. A vertex cannot, it's just a point, so you cannot see how is it oriented. While an edge, for example, let's select an edge in this mode so you can see, I can rotate the edge, which works in the same way of selecting the 2 points and rotate them, so it's the same effect. And the vertex, of course, if I go here, cannot be rotated in the parallel axis. So see now the green one is the Y. If I press R and I press Y, nothing is happening, okay, because I'm trying to rotate the edge around himself, so it doesn't work. Scale, of course, here it works in one dimension only for the vertex, for the edge, because it has only 2 dimensions, so I cannot really scale it this way horizontally. I can scale the whole object, I can scale all the vertices together, or I can scale 2 edges, okay? If I select 2 vertices and I can scale them as they are aligned, they will scale only in one direction. If I select 3 of them, it will be exactly as any operation I do on these 2 edges. I cannot scale one vertex. I can scale 2 of them, for example, to get different shapes. Now, whatever I do to the face, let's say that we go in the face mode, and I select the face. As this object is basically made by only one face, whatever I do to that face would give us the same result than if I do the editing on the whole object in object mode. Okay, so scaling, 1 axis, 2 axis, rotation, it's exactly the same. But let's say for a moment that I want to edit a different object. We have a cube which looks the same, but let's go in the other view and enable the solid mode. Now when I select things, let's start with vertices, I can select vertices in different planes. This one is not, it's kind of looks like a mistake, but I'm just showing you what you can do. You can select faces. I can select 2 faces, for example. And now the modification, the editing I do, the edit I do in these faces are different from selecting all the faces. So if you press A, you select everything in that mode. So for example, if I am in edit mode with vertices, A, select them all. let's say that, for example, you want to select them all but one. Instead of selecting all the vertices that you need one by one, it's better to select all and then unselect, deselect with control the one you don't want. Okay, this way that vertex will stay still while you do your operation on the rest of the object. So I created a cube now just to explain that selecting one face in an object that is made by one face doesn't make much sense. You need to select faces to do operation only when you have an object with multiple faces. So for example, again, let's go to yes. So the pivot point, which is in Blender is called origin. When you create an object, you have this yellow dot, orange dot, which is the orange, it's the origin of the object, and basically it's how can I explain easily? It's the center of your operations. I don't want to show you yet how to move it because it's gonna complicate the operation, but yeah, it's important to understand that. Let's say that if you want to rotate the object, instead of around its center, you may want to rotate the objects based on this vertex. I can show you how to do it, okay? But let's keep it there for a moment. It's important to understand that every object has an origin, and all the operations are relative to that origin, called pivot point or called center of mass. Blender call it origin, so it's good you know that. Now I want to show you other object you may use, like a grid. A grid looks like a rectangle. Hello Techno, welcome back. Looks like a rectangle, but it's actually a rectangle with a lot of subdivisions. So with a grid, if you go from solid mode to the outline wireframe mode, you see what I mean. So it's basically a rectangle with a lot of polygons in it. That means that you can do different things. So if I go in edit mode, right now it's 10 by 10. Of course, you can change this while you create the object. If I press in edit mode, now I can select a number of different things. First of all, I can select multiple faces, then move, for example, which is something I couldn't do before. And in the same way, you can move all the components. Don't forget that the final look for you, if you're doing 2D, is gonna be this one, flat. Doesn't matter what's inside. What's inside, it's mainly important for 3D, but in 2D it's not really important. So the general rule is keep it simple as possible. Probably in a shape like this, if you want to create a shape like this one, the external one, you would not need all of this that it's inside. Okay, this was just an example to show you how to do that. Another way to have more subdivision, let's say that you have a plane and say, okay, I need a point here that goes up because I want to make a different shape, like a pentagon. One way you can do it, it's, for example, selecting going back to the wireframe mode, you select the vertex, you want the edge that you want to subdivide, you want to split, right click, subdivide, and it will create one cut. And you can decide how many cuts you need. So 2 is now creating one cut here and one cut here. 3 1, 2, 3. Let's go with 3, okay? And there's no smoothness at the moment, we don't need that. Still look the same, but if you select vertex, you can see that I have multiple control points. So we said that we wanted to create a pentagon, and that's not a pentagon at all. So I need to remove this, and here is our pentagon. It's actually irregular, but that's another story. So same way, now I can select this edge and subdivide and say, okay, now I want 2 subdivision to cut here, and then I can take say I can take this, and I can move it up, or I can move it up with G and just Y. Now, an important thing, if you, while you are moving or rotating or scaling, let's say that I press G and then I want just to go up, and then I press Ctrl, it will go following steps. So it's basically a snap. This is not the only way you have to make shape. There are multiple ways to make different kind of shapes, and some of them may be more quicker than other. So depending on the shape you want to achieve, you need to know in advance what is going to be my final result, what shape is going to be my primitive, that's how it's called, that I will use, what's going to be the primitive shape or mesh that I'm going to use in order to achieve my result. So there is some kind of planning before starting anything. If you import a shape directly from a different software, that's a different story, and I'm going to show you that too, because that was the plan: designing in Revit Designer, exporting from there, importing in Blender, and do the editing and animation in Blender. So let's remove these and let's go with a circle. Okay, let's create a circle and let's go back to 16 subdivision. I only want 16 subdivision. They may seem not many, but if an object is going to be this small on the screen, they are pretty much what you need. So always remember to optimize your scene with the number of polygons. In this case, that's what you want to care about: faces, trees, and vertices. Keep them at the minimum as possible. Even if your computer is very powerful, doesn't matter. At the end of the day, if you have a very complex scene, they will add up. So you want to keep always an eye to the final size of your scene for what it concerns faces and vertex. And as I said, if you have an object like this that is going to be very small, I'll show you the difference of the two. Let's create one with all of this, and I'll move it on the side so you can see the difference. Now, if they are very big on screen, you can see, okay, I need probably a lot of subdivision. I need a lot of segments and vertices and faces. But if they're going to be a small detail, well, what's the difference now? Can you still see it? Let's go even smaller. Can you still see it? Probably not. So it's very important to keep your scene optimized, because in the final phase of your work, when you're going to render, everything that you created is going to be processed. The more things you have, the longer will take the render. And then talking about longer render, if you have some experience with the rendering in 2D, or like with video editing, that's nothing compared to the time it takes to render in 3D, if you have not made the design clean and smooth. So it's easy in 3D to create something that is going to take excuse me, it's going to take a long time to render. It needs to be also optimize because your graphic card, depending on where you're working, if you're working on a laptop or if you want to open your project in a different computer, you need to be sure that that computer is going to be able to process all the data. So the general rule is keep it simple. Unless you need more detail, don't add more detail. If in doubt, there are ways to avoid the decision from the first step. Let's say that you have a plane, which is a square. We have a fantastic here modifier I showed you briefly last time, and these are tools that are non-destructive tools. That means that whatever I add from this menu can be removed and you go back to the primitive you started with. Usually you'll do a mix of editing on the primitive, on the mesh, and adding some modifier. The reason why you have modifier and everything, it can be done in edit mode, but the reason why you have modifier is not just because it's non-destructive so you can go back, but also all the settings can be animated. Okay, so for now let's say that everything that can be done in the modifier with the modifier menu can be animated. Sometimes you need to do it for that reason, sometimes you only do it because you want to go back to a previous state. Kiss. Okay. Must be an acronym of something. I'm faging. So let's say we have a square and we add this subdivision surface, and you see what happens. It basically has transformed your square in a circle, and we can add viewport subdivisions. So this one is the viewport, is not the render. And as you can see, it adds some kind of smoothness. Now, the square is not a proper example to become a perfect circle because of its shape. But if we apply the same rule to a very low poly shape like this, let's say we have this one, okay? I say, okay, this is not really a circle, it's an octagon. And we don't know if we need or not more subdivision because it's probably gonna be small, but what if I want to zoom in? Keep it simple and stupid. Keep it simple, stupid. Yeah, that's kind of it. So if we want to zoom in this object in a different moment, we can still add the subdivision surface modifier and add subdivision as much as we need. That means that if I'm going to edit this object right now, I will only edit the original geometry. So I'm not gonna edit what is gonna be the final result. I'm gonna edit everything that was done before I applied this subdivision modifier. So I press Tab to go into edit mode to show you what I mean. This is the object I created. It's the octagon, and I can only edit that, while the circle, the more smooth circle, it's interpolated given my shape thanks to this modifier. So I can still edit this. Let's say that I actually don't want a completely round circle. I want like more an oval kind of things. I select my vertices and I scale it down. You see that the shape I can achieve are completely different from what I started with. So if I remove, let me remove the modifier. This one actually, it will just hide the modifier from the scene. This is what I'm editing, but this is what it's gonna look like. So sometimes, not always of course, you may use this technique to increase the resolution, interpolating your basic frame. Okay, it's Easter and I'm basically doing an egg. I just realized that I'm doing an eggy shape, but let's move on. Okay, I'm doing something that it's very organic and smooth, but on a very easy and simple wireframe, a cage that can be edited easily. So let's remove this and go back to this status. So this is the reason why it's non-destructive, because everything that I do here, like subdividing, will stay there. And I can achieve the same result from the edit mode, but then will be forever. So let's move this on a side. I'm going to copy that. To copy this object, I can do it in a different way. The best way is pressing Shift D, which means duplicate, and then I want to move it on the X axis, so horizontally, so I press X and I move it. And the reason why I did this is because I want to show you removing the modifier. So if we start from scratch again and say, okay, I want to achieve that look, I could do this, for example, selecting all the edges, subdividing them with some smoothness. Okay, I can achieve probably a similar effect. It's not exactly the same, but let's say that I'm doing this just to increase the resolution. Now it's smooth, but I cannot go back to what I had before. And now I am with an object with plenty of points to control. So while I can go here and quickly change the shape to something else, if I want to do the same with this object, well, there are ways to do it, but it's gonna take a long time to do something that it's smooth. But you may want to create an object that is not smooth, and that's why there are different ways to achieve different results. Okay, so it's not one it's better than the other, it's more you need to learn that there are different ways, and then while you're planning, you're editing, you need to apply the best way to create your design. Also, usually the smooth subdivision surface modifier, it's used for something a bit more organic. That's how is it called when there are a lot of curves and it resembles something, let's say, alive in a way, or very smooth. While the other way, using these hard edges, it's called usually hard surface modeling. But these are just naming it, just so you have an idea. When they talk about hard surface, they're talking about something that it's non-organic. When it's organic, it's very smooth. When it's hard edges, it's just the very straight angles and shapes. Of course, there are objects that may have both of them, and it's a matter of taste, design, or whatever you want to do. Probably a face, if you're modeling a face or a head of a person, it's organic, while if you're modeling let's say a loot box, that's the classic thing that when you're learning loot box, like in video games, loot box, that's hard surface design. I'm not going to show you all the different modifiers right now. We are going to see some of them, and we're going to use some of them, but not all of them, because there's really we can talk about each single modifier for more than 1 hour probably, so there's a lot to learn. It's important you know what you need and where is it. So we're going back to this shape because I want to show you the difference between applying the same modifier if it's a 2D object or a 3D object. So we are created a plane, and then we're gonna create also a cube, and we'll move the cube on a side, and we'll go in 3D now. And now we add the subdivision surface with 2 subdivision to a plane. This is the result. And we add the same subdivision surface modifier to a cube. So as you can see, you have completely different results. And from the top, they may look similar, but they are actually not. The only reason why the way you can see that they are not similar is because now you can see the faces, the polygons, because they are lit. But if you check only the perimeter of these two objects, you will see that even the perimeter is not the same. One is smaller. And that's because the interpolation, let me go back, and that's because the interpolation of the object, so this subdivision surface modifier, is made taking an account of all the different parts of the object. Let me go into edit mode. You can see now that I have a cage here. That's my model. My model is this cage here, while the content, it's only an approximation. So why I'm showing you this? Because if you have a smooth object, or an object that needs not to show the segment when zoomed in, it needs to be from the beginning an object that's meant to be organic. While if you have an object that it's very hard and you apply the subdivision modifier, you may get, well, you are basically transforming your object into something else. That may be a way, but it's not always what you want. Let me show you another modifier so we go back to understand what I'm talking about. We'll go back from the top, and I'm going to show you the bevel modifier, which doesn't seem to be doing much. A lot of parameter, forget this parameter for a moment. Oops. And oops, sorry guys. And this seems not be doing much. But let's go then to the cube one. That was the plane. And that's what I meant. You cannot achieve this same result with this, because the bevel needs to be the bevel modifier needs to be on a shape like this, on a mesh like this. If you want to achieve the same result, let's say that you want what's called usually a round corner, okay, round corner square. There are other ways to do it, but that's not the way you do it. Okay, and I think I'm not gonna show you that right away. That was just to explain to you that some modifier really needs a third dimension to work properly. Oh, and again, sorry, I'll go back to that. And again, if I move a vertex here, it will keep the effect. It will keep the modifier. So it's really important, you know, when you're applying a modifier, what is the effect you want to achieve. But you can test it and check if you like it or not. And then there are a few parameters that you may want to learn. For example, if you want just to get some smoothing to the edges, and if you want to have instead just a 45-degree cut to the object, that's more about the final design of 3D, so we don't care much, and we most of all we're gonna create all our shapes on a Gravity Designer. So it's important you know where these things are, but we're not gonna do it straight away. Operation with objects. Let's say that we have two objects here, so Shift D and then move it around. I can see here that there are two different planes. One thing you really have to do is name your objects. Now we have two objects, doesn't make much sense, but when you start designing, let's say that this is your house and this is your something else, name it. Because in the moment, something else, in the moment you will have thousands of objects here, and it may happen quite fast, you don't know how to bevel cannot affect border parts. So you need to know what you're selecting, where is it. But an important thing is that sometimes you want to combine objects into one bigger object. I'll show you already how to do collection. This is a collection. We were working inside a collection. But there is another thing that you can do, it's joining the shapes. So if I select the two shapes and then I press it's already done. So if I select the two objects and then I press, I can't select it, Control G, you see that here one object disappeared basically, and the last object that it's selected stays with the name, because this is basically going to be embedded in the last object. So select the one that you want to embed, the second one, Control G, and now you have one geometry. Okay, this object, it's one geometry. It means that if I go in Tab, Edit mode, I can edit them at the same time. Okay, they are together one object. At the same time, if you want to separate this, so it's like the operation we've seen in the Gravity Designer. If you want to separate it, there are different ways to do it. And the fastest way I can suggest, it's actually, let me think what's the cleanest way to do it. It's probably, yeah, okay, well, I will go with separate by loose part, and then you have the two parts. Now I'll show you how to get there. There's a lot of menus that are not where you expect they are, but if there is something that you want to do and you don't know where is it, actually you can do operator search, which is F3, so it's easy to open. Then you start typing what you need, caps lock, and then you select what you need. And let me create it, let me join them again. So if I click on separate, there are different ways to separate object. I can separate a part that I selected. I can separate by material if they have different material assigned. Okay, I can separate by loose part. In this case, these are two different shapes. They are loose because they are not connected to each other. So they don't share any vertex, edge, or face. So I can just separate, and I have back two different objects. Once you separate, the object separated has different name from the original one, because that was merged to the previous one, and it's gonna have just a number, so you want to rename it in case you need. So this is something else. It's worth going through a number of different mesh that you can work with. Thinking about what you may need in 2D, but it's important to see how to move the object in the 3 dimension. So let's start creating a sphere. There are different kinds of sphere. You can see here all the segments that are in 3 dimension, not just in 2 dimension. That means that if I move, I have a sphere that looks like that. And then let's create, for example, a cone. And then you may want to move the sphere. I press G and I press Z, and I move the sphere up. Then I press S and I scale it a little bit. Let's move it a bit down. Okay, now you have these 2 geometry, and you would like to move them around all together. Same thing. Select first, select second. Oops, sorry. And then join. Ctrl J or right click join. And now you have one object. It's still called cone because that was the last object I selected, but it behaves like a single object. Now the geometry inside are not completely fused together. There are other ways to fuse geometry together, but they are actually, the cone, it's inside the sphere. So if we go to the wireframe view, you can see what I mean. Okay, so that means that I can still separate them easily because there are 2 loose parts altogether. Okay, so yes, there is a shortcut that P, probably I don't use it that much, and it's parent, so it's not for separated. I don't know, Ganapathy must have a different kind of hotkey mapping. So I will do F3 and it will show the last command that you use. Separate, loose part, and yeah, and they are loose parts, so they are separated again. Let's start seeing how can we make this shape look a bit better. You can play with all the geometries. You also have there are like a lot of different geometries. I made a video of showing all the different geometries you can create. It's already on the channel. This is a torus, for example, and there are you can create your own preset, and there are a number of settings that you can choose. For example, the external radius or the internal radius. But the reason why I'm showing you this object is because it's fairly low resolution, but we don't want these segments to be visible. So while this is showing the structure of the donut, it's not the way it's going to be rendered. The way it's going to be rendered, or the way I want this to be rendered, it's with a smooth surface, even if there are a low number of segments, subdivisions or faces. So with right click, I decide that the shading of the object, or if you prefer, how the shadow it's made on the object, that's where shade comes from, will be smooth. Right now it's in a shading mode called flat, where each single face has only one color. Okay, I don't know if you can see that, but every single face has always one color, and that's why you can see the separation between the faces. If you right click and do shade smooth, now you can see that it looks smooth. Now this is just a visualization. That means that still here you can see that there are the segments that we created. So if we go here, you can see all the structure. Look, for example, this angle here. Well, this way you won't see that, because the shading, so the light to dark passage, it's smooth. That's what does it mean. We are not changing the geometry. And I'll show you also, I'll duplicate this, I'll put that up, I'll select the other one, I'll set it flat, and now I'll add a subdivision surface. Now I'm increasing the number of faces, but as you can see, even if I have a lot of faces, but the shading is flat, I still can see each single face. And that's okay if you want to achieve that result. But if I add here the smooth, now you can see that this is much better than this one. It's also more precise the way the light goes, because there's more elements to process. It's also heavier on the system. So again, if these two objects, if you look here, and these two objects are very distant, now which one is better? Can you say that? And that's my point. If you don't need it, don't do it. Just do it when you have a very close object that needs a lot of detail, then you enable this. Otherwise, you don't really need it. Look the count of the faces. Right now I have in the scene 9,700, while without this I only have a fraction of it. It's like 4 times less the number of faces. So when you are editing, it's probably worth using a mix of flat shading and smooth shading. Doesn't really matter, it can be changed anytime. It's only the way the light works on your object, but it doesn't change the geometry, just to have a better preview basically of what you do while you're doing. While in the end, when we talk about the render, it's a different story. But here the difference is between having this smooth, let's say here we are in 2D, here are in the 2D space still, and the difference is between having this object or having this object. So yeah, there's a lot of difference. This works independently by the color, the material, doesn't really matter. This works always in the same way. You can also decide to have different part of the object with different kind of shading, but again, let's not go there right now. Last thing for today, it's actually showing you, first of all, that you can start playing with shapes like this. Okay, again, you can do it smooth, and then you can probably add, if you want, more subdivision. This is called Suzanne, and it's the mascot of Blender. I guess it's a mascot. And you can play a little bit with this model. If you only apply the subdivision surface modifier and then press edit, you can still edit the point of it. So if you select object, you can start changing the shape. It's just to play around a bit with something that looks familiar, or maybe not familiar, but that looks like something instead of being a square or a cube. So you can select a group of points and move them around. You can select this bit and move it around. Something that you may want to know, it's actually that when I do a selection of points, normally I select only the points in view. If I want to select all the points in that area, so also the ones that I don't see, but on the other side, I need to press on this one, which is X-ray. And right now we'll show a confusing, if you're not used to this, it's quite confusing. But if we go on a side view, for example, or in a front view, and I select all of this part, right now I selected all those vertices around, not just the ones that were in view. That means that now I can move this bit. While if I select without this enabled, some of them will not move because they are not selected. Okay, this is when you do 3D, it's very important. Of course, the shape from the top wouldn't have any sense, but if you want to do this, want to have this in a 2D environment for animation, for example, you just rotate that, and so I press R, and then I want to rotate with the X. I press Ctrl, so it's snapping, and then on the left top of the viewport you can see the number changing as the degrees, so 90 degree, and now it's facing up. So if I go in the 3D, I can see it's facing up, and then I can do all the, with X-ray enabled, I can do all the editing I want. And I picked up even this one that I don't want, for example. Okay, I scale it. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just fooling around. So last thing before going, and then next time we're going to talk about simple material. We're gonna import some shape from Gravity Designer, and we start adding simple material to the shapes. So it's gonna be tomorrow, kind of the same time. What I'm gonna show, it's actually something interesting called proportional editing. Let's create our circle, and let's say that this one, oh, that's too much. Let's say this one has enough subdivision, and I want to slightly change the shape, but I don't want to move only one vertex at a time because it's gonna take forever. What I can do, it's enabling this, which is called proportional editing. So if I click on that, now I can see a circle around my selection, and whatever I do, it will propagate on the object, okay, given the circle here around. So if I select this one down here and I move, it's gonna be the same for there. If I want to select an edge and move, it's gonna be exactly the same. And I, of course, can I change how big is the circle. Okay, first of all, if I click here, I see the shape of the influence of what I'm doing. And if I scroll with the mouse wheel, I can change the influence. Right now you can see the circle, it's only including my selection, so that means that whatever I do, it's only my selection. If I increase with the scroll wheel, now it's including two other vertices, so that means that what I do, it's going to propagate to those vertices. And if I, of course, enlarge up to, let's say, half of the sphere, whatever I do, it's going to be smoother. And this is a good way to deform quickly any shape to something we need, which I don't know what is this. Probably it's a very stylized Italy shape. Okay, guys, it's all for today. Next time we're gonna have a lot of fun with material. We're gonna start seeing colors instead of normal sad gray shapes. We're going to understand what is the vocabulary used for shading. So for coloring these objects, we're going to see how I can change the environment of my scene. And well, that's all for now. So thank you again. If you have any question, let me know right now, or leave it a comment below, of course. If you're not watching this, leave a comment below. Otherwise, please let me know now. We are still in time to see something that wasn't clear. See you later. See you next time. Ganapati. Anybody else? Sam, Mariana? It's all clear for you? Well, okay. Okay, so I speak to you soon. Bye.